and friends, and here we are, one of our best friends. And now we're going to do questions and answers. Thank you.
So the first question that's been coming up a couple times from our viewers online is regarding B12 and good raw food sources of B vitamins in general, and specifically B12.
There are vitamin B12 sources that are supposedly in spirulina or blue-green algae that do not raise human active vitamin B12. So that's a very critical distinction. Is an assay that's done by a laboratory might say there's vitamin B12 in something, but is it really raising vitamin B12 in the human body? And the answer in those cases with spirulina and blue-green algae is the answer is no, it's not. There's a lot of research now that's indicating that generally we don't produce as much vitamin B12 whether we're a vegetarian, meat eater, vegan, and whatever, because we have an atrophied appendix that has been atrophied probably due to dietary indiscretions by most of the human race over the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. So the appendix in a gorilla or chimpanzee is actually a much more evolved sac, and it's like a fermentation zone where bacteria can culture the food, and therefore they can produce a little bit more byproduct of vitamin B12 that could be absorbed, and in that kind of a situation we might be in a better vitamin B12 state overall. This is a problem that does not affect just vegans, vegetarians by a long shot. It's actually B12 deficiencies are most prevalent in meat-eating pregnant women. And this is one of these issues with the digestive tract of the human body has been altered slightly, and it's probably a problem with the appendix. So I want to just put that out there. There are B12 supplements out there, the cyanocobalamin supplements and methylcobalamin supplements. And what Gabriel and I really recommend is methylcobalamin versus cyanocobalamin. Due to absorption factors, it's just much more available, and you could use them sublingually, and that's one way to go. I'll do that.
Okay, good. It's a question everybody wants to ask. You kind of wonder, why are we asking this question? But first, let's go back to what David just said. And it's possible. We talked about this appendix thing, and it is really possible even in the last few hundred years. And actually, the guy that did this is the research in the library was Brian Clements from Hippocrates Institute. That's the one where I got the information.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's in the last few hundred years, there's this atrophy. It used to be a much bigger organ. Okay, given that, we used to have bacteria, this is what we think, B12 producing bacteria in our small intestine. Now that's where the B12 is absorbed. For some reason, it slipped down. It's like, wherever you want to put it, it just slipped down and it's in our colon. So we do really make B12, but it's in the wrong place. Well, what does the wrong place mean? Well, the truth is, if you want to be completely all natural, they did do research in England. It did show that there's lots of human active B12 in their feces. And they did this is more of an English thing. They actually did this research, and they had B12 deficient people, which is how you do the research. Sorry. Okay, eat their feces. Okay, they had made extracts. And they actually found that when they had the extracts of their own personal feces, they increased their B12. And they were no longer B12 deficient. So if you're really hot that this should be completely natural, this is really easy. But for those of us who don't find that the most tasteful way to go about it, there's simpler ways to approach this, and
control.
And we kind of recommend a live B12 kind of supplement that's made by bacteria, because actually it's bacteria who make the B12. And so we use the Nano B complex. You can get at the Tree of Life and other places. So that's a live B12 from living bacteria. So kind of keep that in mind, and it's a total B12 total B complex. Now, there is a myth that David specifically just referred to, which is it's only vegetarians or vegans that get B12 deficient. Not true at all. 40% or 39% of meat eaters are B12 deficient. That's a very high percentage. 80%, at least in 18 studies, 80% of vegans or live fooders will become B12 deficient in 6 years. Some people can go 30 years, but you don't want to necessarily wait until you have a collapse in the B12 situation. The other thing that David mentioned is B12 in pregnant women, and meat-eating, pregnant women are very, very low in B12. Well, it's a very serious problem because children have almost no B12 reserve, whereas adults have maybe 3,000 micrograms reserve, kids have 25 micrograms. And the research really does show, unfortunately, that B12 deficiency in children and infants, which is, it really does impair the neurological and brain development, particularly if it happens in the first 2 years. So we're a little sensitive about anybody getting B12 deficient because the research shows you can get some repair, but not necessarily 100% repair from the damage of a B12 deficiency. So in the idea of, let's say, protection, because really don't cause any harm is a pretty interesting statement made by Hippocrates, physicians don't cause any harm, we can't in integrity say, oh yeah, you can do without it, because the communities where they have tried this, and this is some of the fruitarian communities that didn't make it past 1 or 2 years, or 3 years, like in Australia, because their kids had mental retardation, a lot of problems that happened. And there's a community in Israel that was any supplements, and several of their kids died of B12. This isn't a life food community, it was just a vegan community, cooked vegan. And so we're a little sensitive to say every pregnant woman, if they want to not take any risk for themselves and for their children, really, really need to have B12 supplementation. Now, it's possible that we're going to have some breakthroughs. Maybe we'll find a culture of bacteria that we implant, like an acidophilus, in the small intestine. Maybe we'll find that. Maybe, and we're actually doing some, about ready to start some research, there are some green foods or green food combinations that will raise it. So the criteria isn't, as David very clearly said, it's not that how much human active B12. That was the mistake Gabriel made in 1990 when he came out with conscious eating. We showed all the algae had plenty of human active B12. All the sea vegetables had it, but they had the analogs that blocked it. So the real test is how much does it raise the B12, human active B12, when you take something. So that's the way we're going to approach it, the research here. And we already have someone who's willing to supply the materials. It's a product that they've made. And we'd love to tell you, we can do it from our own food, but we can't do that now because of just basically ethical responsibility. We can't have people getting sick because they're B12 deficient. We can't have newborn children and children of any age not having proper neurological development. That's just not acceptable from a physician point of view. Now, the people want to, die by their theories. That's okay. That's your business. But we can't recommend that at this level. Now, how do we check for B12? The accurate test is the methylmalonic acid test. That's a urine test. It's much more accurate than serum B12. It's the gold standard. And so we're going to use that as our testing. And it looks like, we used to think 200 micrograms of B12 in the serum, 150 was okay, but now we're looking at 400 to 450 if we're going to not only have a certain good effects from the B12, but actually decrease the homocysteine and other things. We actually need more B12 in the system. And homocysteine, the accumulation of homocysteine really is associated with a much higher incidence of heart disease and heart attacks. So again, we're taking risks we don't need to take. We strongly recommend people do some level of B12 supplementation. Hopefully this research will show something that we're able to get it off of our certain food concentrates, but we can't make that statement at this point, so we're trying to be responsible. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, the ocean's alive marine phytoplankton is going to be coming down the pipe in terms of its testing, because the initial report that we got on it is that it tested well for vitamin B12, 3 different types: methylcobalamin, cyanocobalamin, and something cobalamin.
Right.
And 3 out of 4, and that indicates that this could be a candidate for a real human active vitamin B12 in a microalgae, which would be a plankton. That's a possibility, and that's something that I'm sure you'll probably test here at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's simple. You just find people are B12 deficient, feed them this, no other sources, and it either raises it or doesn't raise it. I mean, it's not that complicated. It's just understanding it. It's not what's in it, but will it make a difference?
Will it work? I mean, you can imagine if that's true with the B12. I mean, how many other things are out there where it says, well, it contains this and this vitamin E or vitamin C or B3 or whatever, and when it gets in your body, it doesn't do a darn thing. And there's a lot of things like that. I mean, zinc is like that, where you take zinc from a seed. I mean, all seeds have zinc in them. For example, poppy seeds, cacao beans, any peanuts, all nuts, everything contains zinc in it. But when you actually eat it, do you absorb it? And the answer is, in most cases, you don't, or you don't get enough to reverse deficiencies, even if you're eating tons of poppy seeds, which supposedly have the most zinc of anything, right? So there's things like this that are out there that don't kind of add up. It's also like this with the calcium equation. Like if you have, weak bones or osteoporosis, should you eat tons of calcium? Well, that's the theory, but does that add up? And the answer is, doesn't add up. The more calcium you eat, the worse it usually gets. And that's why it's important to read between the lines in the field of nutrition. It's not just what sounds right, but also what is right by experience.
Yeah, I think it's really important. The calcium question takes us into a whole other area,
That's a whole other area.
Which was maybe worth going into. But let's just say that there's a group in Africa who only get 350 milligrams of calcium in their diet, and they have no cases of osteoporosis. Watusis, I think it is. And what's going on? 350 milligrams, we're recommending, not Gabriel is, but generally 1,200 milligrams. And it doesn't really work. What's happening here? And what's happening is that the calcium, one, has to be assimilatable. We do get enough from our foods, and we also know the biological transmutation makes calcium also, so there isn't need for a lot of that. But maybe we were talking in our seminar the other day about the nanobacteria, and maybe you want to continue talking about that a little bit, because it's a worse story what the calcium supplements do cause for us.
It's possible, and in fact likely, that oyster shell calcium and coral calcium are contaminated with organisms that cause calcification. So I'm going to say that again because that is so incredibly critical. It's likely that oyster shell calcium and coral calcium are contaminated with organisms that cause calcification. So if we really look at what actually kills people, like what is the real problem, like a heart attack, what's that? It's a calcification of the coronary artery. Now, the theory previously had been that's an effect of too much cholesterol, bad homocysteine, any numerous things. But in fact, what it really looks like now is that actually that calcium that's building up in the coronary artery is an organism that's building up in the coronary artery that forms a shell on itself, and calcium supplements contain that organism, and therefore they can actually increase our calcification, which is our aging, and then also makes us susceptible to all different kinds of calcification diseases, which is every disease. So we've got to be very careful about calcium supplementation, which I actually don't believe in really at all, unless it's something very exotic like pearl calcium or something very interesting like that. But you don't really need that stuff.
Right.
You can get it all from your vegetables, and I don't take any calcium at all of any kind. I haven't for years, and actually I think my bones are better now than ever before because I get enough of the right types of minerals, which we can get into. Should we get into that?
Yeah, I mean, one of them is silica.
Big time.
And silica converts to calcium, but the point is, you look at how the bones are made, and you're looking at silica, magnesium, manganese, boron, and these are really, and of course, D3 plays a big role. These are all very much important. And what do we need for D3? D3, well, you need 20 minutes of sun a day. Not a big deal. But if you're living north of San Francisco, in essence, I think it's the 38th parallel, then during the winter months you do need to have some level of D3 supplementation. What we know about, besides D3 being really important for bone, it's not a vitamin, it's really a hormone, is it has some of the initial research is suggesting that it decreases one's susceptibility to over 70% of the different cancers. Not bad. So there are many things for bone growth. One being exercise. Okay? Weight-bearing exercise. And so we don't think really that calcium is a very good idea, but in terms of nanobacteria, it's really a bad idea. Now, I'll make a footnote on the coral calcium. There are some people who feel that there's one strain of coral calcium that doesn't have the nanobacteria in it. But besides that, and there's only one company, and that we don't really recommend it. And I'll put it that way. We are carrying some coral calcium that supposedly, and we're counting on their integrity, because we can't research every single thing, is that one strain doesn't have it. But we're looking at coral calcium, and pretty much a lot of the calciums contribute to this calcification. And that's the problem with all this calcium. And it's also a problem with too much vitamin D. So you get 20 minutes in the sun, guess what? You've just earned 20,000 units of vitamin D. Probably we need somewhere between 800 and 1,200 units of D a day. So we're way safe just with sun to make it work. So these are all some of the subtleties of the minerals and how we look at it. So we're not recommending calcium anymore for that. I have the impression that maybe many of the calcium supplements have the nanobacteria. That's an impression, that's not a fact.
Yeah, that's my impression, and Dr. Patrick Flanagan also corroborated that as well. He felt the same way. And this is one of the things about our culture, right? That the truth, which is we need calcium, actually turns out to be the most dangerous thing we could probably do for our health, which is just haphazardly taking these calcium supplements when really the results of them have never borne out. They've never affected bone density in a positive way, and they're likely contributing to the problem. We can just recap again. Silicon and magnesium are really the most important things for bone density. Where do you get silicon from? Silicon is tricky to get unless you're a wild food eater. You could get a lot of silicon actually from seaweeds. You can definitely get a lot of it from wild foods like nettles, wild herbs, like oat straw is a great plant. Straw in general, just grass in general when it's mature. Most of us are doing like wheatgrass, which is...
And horsetail grass too.
Yeah, horsetail is a fantastic source. And horsetail extracts, which you can actually buy, are remarkably good at remineralizing bone. I mean, this one woman came to see me, 80 years old, 80 years of age, old student of Ann Wigmore. She came to a seminar that we did. She broke her wrist in a fall, and she went to the doctors and got a doomsday report. So she remembered what Ann Wigmore told her, which is that she should actually do horsetail tea and horsetail extracts. Now, horsetail is Equisetum arvens, which is a very popular herb worldwide. It grows in all riparian areas and all temperate climates all over the world, and it looks like a little pine tree when it's young. Anyway, she decided she would do that route before doing what the doctor said, which was, she's going to have to get all these pins and needles and every other kind of thing. She's 80. She thought, I have nothing to lose. So she did. She had her wrist immobilized, and she did that. Within 3 days, she started getting motion back in her fingers. At 80, within 3 weeks, she was completely back to normal. So when you're on the right theory, that's how powerful it can be. When you're on the wrong theory, it's going to be a whole, hula hoop dance, which is like, well, you need calcium and this much boron and this much of this and that thing, and then sunlight and weight-bearing exercise and all this other stuff, which is all good, but it's not really the complete picture. See, if you have the right minerals, then you're going to get the right effect. And if we target, where the evidence is, where the research is, and the time-proven methodologies are, silicon and magnesium are what's needed to build calcium in our body, which seems to be like, I thought we needed to eat calcium to build calcium, and that is not the truth.
And that's the whole work that Gabriel talked about in spiritual nutrition, and even in 1986, is the biological transmutation of really how to do it. The other thing is, you take an herb like horsetail grass, and you're getting the whole frequency that's going to guide that herb to do the healing. When you're taking these calcium supplements, there's no frequency left to give you any guidance. And that's a key understanding. The body has frequencies. It pulls, according to its frequency needs, it pulls things that have the right frequency to where they need to go. And that's key. And one of the things about osteoporosis is the bones are intense frequencies. Well, osteoporosis is a chaotic frequency. I mean, one way of talking about disease is health is, in a sense, everything is harmonic frequencies. Disease is rogue frequencies. And in the bone, you really have a rogue frequency that's actually drawing the wrong materials to the bone that furthers the osteoporosis. So when you put something like silica grass in that, horsetail grass I mean, you are actually creating and correcting the frequency. And that's one way of thinking about, we mentioned about salt before. What salt is doing, real healthy salt, complete salt, is it's creating a harmonizing frequency for the whole body that upgrades all the meridians. That's what we said, in 15 minutes. That's what we're getting when we're getting the whole foods. We're getting the frequencies, which are not disrupted by radiation, any kind of food processing, microwave and so forth, where the frequencies are completely lost or so badly disabled that it actually draws and makes us ill. I mean, moving into microwave just for a second, just to make the point, that the research on microwave food is that people who eat microwave food, they did research people eating regular natural food and microwave food, same person, okay, is that when they went to the microwave food, that their blood chemistry significantly shifted to actually a very disrupted blood chemistry. When we say blood chemistry, it's lab results and so forth, as well as the quality and energy of the blood. So that's what we're talking about, because we're putting in dissonant frequencies, chaotic frequencies. When we're talking live foods and whole foods and whole herbs, we're putting whole frequencies in that reorganize and upgrade the frequency of the organs and of the whole body. And that's a way we need to start thinking. That's why the whole salt discussion was so, as somebody said, don't eat salt, but they're missing the point. When you take the healthy salt, you're taking a whole frequency that upgrades your frequency for your total body. Whereas you're taking, the covalent cooked salt, it's going to downgrade the frequency and cause illness. Chaos in the system versus harmony in the system.
I mean, that just reminded me of something that probably is worth saying, and that is when somebody is ill, they're usually extremely salt deficient. Like when somebody's gone through chemotherapy, they've wiped out all the healthy salts right out of their system. So to reintroduce that is really critical. Years of digestive disturbances, also chronic salt deficiencies, like the right kind of salt, real salt, authentic salt is the way that you phrased it. And that's important too, is like when somebody's recovering from a very long illness or a very long battle, salt has probably been deficient for a year, 5 years, 10 years, and that's where we got to start. We got to start re-salting the tissue. So, for example, digestion. When people can't digest food, one of the biggest reasons is because they don't have any salt in their intestines that help to actually draw the moisture out of the food that's being digested so that things can come out solid. Right? This is the whole thing of like diarrhea and everything comes through that way. That's many times when somebody's ill or on chemotherapy, what's really going on is their body's been sapped of salt and they cannot hold the food anymore. They can't actually suck the moisture out of the food anymore. It just comes right through as a liquid.
Okay, well that was one very long answer. But that's why we're here. That's why you have, Gabriel and David together, because we're going to give you more than just a textbook kind of answer. That's why we're doing the seminar. Okay, next question.
All right, online viewer Mark would like to know, could you explain the prune brain concept you mentioned in relation to the senile older person, and also what sort of live food diet might be useful as a form of treatment for dementia?
Mark, that's a great question. And so let's get the details of it without getting into all the details. So let's understand that the research shows that if you are 2% or more dehydrated, your brain does not work as well. There's more mental confusion, mathematical abilities are decreased, and thinking and perception are decreased. Those are research facts. Okay, so what's going on? What happens is when we're dehydrated and the brain cells are dehydrated and the neurons are dehydrated, which are part of the brain cells, you actually get a shrinkage of the brain cells. That's what it means by dehydration. Now, what happens is the ability to move the neurotransmitters, which are in the cells, is diminished. So when we say prune, what does a prune look like versus a plum?
Shriveled.
It's shriveled up. Exactly. It's a shriveled brain. So a dehydrated brain or a prune brain syndrome is actually what we're talking about. So dehydration really affects mental functioning explicitly. And the reason is the neurons themselves actually are not working right. The neurotransmitters are not being able to be transmitted between the synapses, and you have mental dysfunction. Now what we see in most people who are older is they have a Vata disorder, and a Vata disorder means they're dehydrated, because with age everybody has a tendency to dehydrate. That's why with age everybody should have a Vata balancing diet, and guess what that is? Well hydrated, lots of good water. But guess what? We are a bag of salt and water. And once we get that understanding, we understand that the way we treat Vata disorders is more salty foods and more salt. That's been around for 3,000 years. Not a new idea, but we're just bringing it to your consciousness. And then the other thing, then we've just said hydration and healthy, authentic salt, food and authentic salt. Very, very important. Third piece here is sweet. Now I don't mean white sugar here. We mean sweeter foods. Now where does that take us? Formless foods are sweeter. It means, in terms of Gabriel's approach, low glycemic fruits, for example, are very good. And of course those are the best. Those are your berries and your cherries and your citrus that are just exceptionally good. And the berries are exceptionally good for brain function in general. No accident here. So that's another thing that's important. And creamy and oily, because Vata is rough, hard, and dry. So we want more creamy, oily type foods. Now, where does that take us? Well, one of the things you see with age, if you aren't taking care of yourself in a Vata disorder, is you have neurological disorders, including poor memory, poor thinking, poor function. And so we want to go high on the omega-3s. And that's going to be not only the short-chain omega-3s with your flax and walnuts and hemp seed and so forth. Thank you. That's good. Hemp seed and so forth.
Chia.
And chia, but we also need to convert that to long-chain or take long-chain. And we actually just discovered a product from algae that's been extracted that has the EPA and DHA.
Why don't we get that product up here just so we can tell everyone what that is. This is brand new because we've had this issue in the live food world of getting both DHA and EPA, which are long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, from somewhere. And we've been getting DHA from algae oil for a number of years now, but not EPA. There's a very small amount of EPA in fresh garlic, a very small amount in purslane. But now there's this product.
And also that we know in E3 Live, they've done research. So the blue-green algae has both long-chain.
But it's not very concentrated. And so this company here, I guess they're out of Switzerland, water4.net, W-A-T-E-R number 4.net, has put out a product called V Pure, which has both EPA and DHA from algae concentrated into a vegetarian capsule or gel cap or soft gel. You can see what that looks like on the inside right there. And this product is just out on the market. So that's something that may be of interest to you if you're dealing with someone who you want to get them something like fish oil, but you're not really convinced that fish oil is the way to go.
Fishy.
It's a little fishy. There's whole other piece on this, like Alzheimer's, dementia, that whole thing, and that is the massive levels of toxicity. which may be overwhelming. I mean, we're talking about heavy metal toxicity, pesticide toxicity, volatile organic compound toxicity, adhesive toxicity, chemicals that are in people's homes and their cleaning supplies toxicity. I mean, just massive, overwhelming amounts of toxicity over a lifetime. And then backing them off of that by using zeolites, MSM, infrared saunas, all of that kind of stuff may or may not be possible for somebody based on their own commitment. You just never know.
Right.
And so that's what we're bumping up into now is people with such severe neurological disorders that the actual solution is pretty massive, and it may be more than that person can even take, at least on the first glance. So maybe you don't even broach those issues on the first glance. Get them on zeolites to start with. Just try to pull some of that heavy metals out of their neurological system. And then the next step beyond that is to go through really like a fast to try to like really dump everything out. Once they've come down the pipe, maybe it takes a year, 2 years, 5 years to get there, but at some point they got to go for the major, get everything out, which includes like fasting, colonics, using heavy amounts of zeolites and MSM, lots of good water and salt, green vegetable juices, and things like spirulina and cilantro, which have that natural affinity to draw heavy metals. It's a big issue, and I look at my parents and I'm just like, okay, they can take some of this, but not all this. Like I got my mom on MSM, but going further than that, and the blue mangosteen, going further than that is just not possible for her right now. Even though I look and I see, well, this toxic load is really high, we just got to do the best we can.
David just gave an advertisement for why we do fasting here, and why we do spiritual fasting, why we have our 10-day detox fasting here, is it really does clear the mind. And when we combine it with what we call liquid zeolite, we are seeing amazing things. Most people, I'm talking even people on live foods, amazing. We test for 26 different toxins, heavy metals, DDT, depleted uranium, the full spectrum of all the kinds of things that you wouldn't want to have in your body. And most live fooders have all 26. But what we found, and this is like what we call preliminary research, because it would be very expensive to do this, is that in 68 I'll say it another way. 86% of the people who add the liquid zeolite, which is what we offer here, and do the green juice fasting, go to 0 of those after 1 week and 100% after 2 weeks. So it really makes a difference, because things like heavy metals, really do, particularly mercury, really do affect brain function. We also recommend, again, according to their vitality, before you get into your 80s or 90s, where it's a big of a stress, that you get your mercury out of your teeth as soon as possible, because that's there. Now, the other source of mercury that we're very concerned with, obviously, is vaccinations. And we may say, well, they don't have mercury in vaccinations now for younger people. That's not entirely true. In fact, right now, in the quote mercury-free, have 3 micrograms of mercury, because they actually rinse the things with mercury as a sterilizer. But now they're trying to recommend the flu vaccine for everybody up to 18. Not only does the flu vaccine not work, that's a detail. CDC, Center for Disease Control, gives you 0 to 14% effectiveness. In Israel, they got 1% effectiveness in the research. But worse, this is the worst news, okay? Which is, in terms of Alzheimer's, we're just talking about Alzheimer's now. There are many problems with vaccines. Is that one researcher has made the statement, a very well-known, famous researcher, is that if you get 5 consecutive years flu vaccines, you increase your chances of Alzheimer's by a factor of 10. That's not what most of us want to do. Why is that? Because vaccinations, according to Russell Blaylock, cause an inflammation in the brain that lasts up to 2 years. That's one vaccination. Now do 10 or 15 or consecutive. So each year you're getting vaccinated, you keep inflaming your brain. Inflammation causes free radicals, and inflammation, and scarring, and you're upping your chances of having really brain problems. There's many, many things that go on. So we're not really a fan of flu vaccinations or any of that. I mean, obviously, when we do look at the research out there, it is very telling that vaccinations for kids have been very much associated, mercury or not mercury, but certainly with mercury, with autism. Now people say, well, how do you prove that? Well, there are groups of people who don't do vaccinations, like the Amish. They have no cases of autism. Isn't that interesting? Versus kids the same age, same thing, who do have autism, high cases. It used to be 1 in, 10,000 or 150,000. It's now 1 in 150 people. That's ridiculous. No. There's research done in Oregon that showed that kids didn't get vaccinated. So they had 900 kids that didn't get vaccinated compared to kids that did get vaccinated. They had 1/2 the amount of autism cases. That's very significant statement. It's hard to really do the research because they make it very difficult to really get adequate research. But just in the sense of that and hyperactivity and ADD and all those things, it's definitely been associated. And when you add this all up with vaccinations. So we're actually going to be giving a program very soon with 2 of the top people in the vaccination field where we're going to lay this out in great detail. But today we're just talking about Alzheimer's. So let's just go back to the diet for a second. We want a Vata pacifying diet. Just to summarize it up, well hydrated. Some level of sweet, and that's like particularly the low glycemic, medium glycemic fruits. That's really important. Smooth, creamy, high salt foods are really good. And just to go back to the omega-3s, which is your creamy and a little bit of fat in it, the omega-3s are really important. So David mentioned a little bit earlier about fish and how that's not really the best source of the long thing. Well, let's get really specific. Hemp and flax have about 24%, 26% varies omega-3s. And if we use the coconut oil, 1 tablespoon, which is safe, you take lots of coconut oil, it can raise your cholesterol, but 1 tablespoon is not as completely safe here as far as we know. You get a conversion rate of, some people, the research varies to 1 to 3 to 6 to 10%. That's up to 10 times higher than the normal 1% conversion rate without the coconut oil. Suddenly you're getting a whole lot. So you want to convert the short chain to the medium and long chain. But now we have actually available to us what we just showed you, the EPA DHA, which is great because it's concentrated. We do kind of recommend that for people because people are so EPA in general, the whole public, meat eating or not. And fish is a problem. Not only does it only have 2% omega-3s, it's mostly EPA. Okay, where do they get it? From the golden algae. But fish today concentrate, amazing, 9 million times the pesticides and herbicides because they don't urinate. Okay? Shellfish like oysters and clams concentrate to 70,000. It's just really not the best idea to take that into your system, which is what David was saying before. So these are the things we're talking about as a basic diet, a Vata pacifying diet that we just said, and then we want to, again, it's your choice. We won't say don't get vaccinated. We can only say that research is showing up to 10 times greater rates of Alzheimer's disease if you get a vaccination because you're inflaming the brain. Okay? You want to get the heavy metals out, and David, as I said, laid out very nicely. Here at the Tree of Life, this is exactly what we do on our 10-day detox and also on our regular fast, our spiritual fast, is we have a really nice detoxification. It's very gentle and very nice. And then people can choose at what level they want to do this. What level do I want to, how much do I love myself? Do I love myself enough to want to heal? Do I love myself to minimize my chances of getting Alzheimer's? I mean, those are personal choices. And of course, as we're doing this, we're not only loving ourselves, but we're loving the planet because we're choosing a way of life that's healthy for us.
I want to just add a little bit to what you're saying there. the coconut oil as an amplifier or catalyst to the omega-3 fatty acids works not only in converting the medium chain omega-3, like what you find in hemp seed and flaxseed, over to EPA and DHA, but it also helps the absorption of EPA and DHA into your neurochemistry. So there's an amplification effect of using, and it's an opposites meeting that creates a third force. This dynamic interaction of opposites, the alchemical trick, which is you take two oppositely charged substances, you bring them together, you get a third resonant force. Well, that's the very opposites of the oil spectrum are coconut oil and then EPA and DHA or omega-3 ALA. And when you bring those together, then you have some kind of an alchemical trick that occurs that actually makes both of them work better in your system. That's the essence of that. And that's really important because it's so easy. You could just, let's say you're making a smoothie up and you put a little bit of hemp seed oil in there or put hemp seeds in there. Well, you just get a little bit of coconut oil in there and then you get that effect and it takes no extra work at all. It's completely simple. Another really easy thing, let's say you're taking some of these capsules that have EPA and DHA in it or soft gels, and you take that, you can just literally take coconut oil and rub it into your gums right in your mouth right at that moment. It's good for your teeth anyway. You get that same effect. It happens instantaneously, real easy to do. I wanted to add two more things about neurological health because everything that we've been talking about here about dementia, Alzheimer's, neurological health applies to people who are way down the pipe, all the way into full-blown Alzheimer's or full-blown dementia. And we can backtrack it all the way to where people are right now. If you feel or you are looking at other people and you're going, they're bordering on going into neurological problems or they have subtle neurological problems, there's a couple other key ideas here. One is high antioxidant content diet. And
it's an anti-inflammatory.
And a key piece of that is megahydrate. Megahydrate is a really powerful antioxidant. And I mentioned yesterday about cacao as a food is the highest antioxidant food in the world on an ORAC score of 621, where say bee pollen's 237, goji berries 133, acai's 185, blueberries 65. On that scale, megahydrate is at 6,000. Just to give you an idea of how powerful an antioxidant megahydrate is, which is Dr. Patrick Flanagan's product. And then one more piece of that is the lion's mane mushroom is probably the most significant discovery in the field of Parkinson's ever, because it's the only botanical ever discovered to stop Parkinson's in its tracks. So that's really interesting because you could take, this is what I do, I'll take, say, omega-3 fatty acids with coconut oil, with megahydrate, with lion's mane all together at once. And then you get that high antioxidant blast, you get all those fatty acids coming together, and you get that kind of like neurological like boost really quickly right to your system. And when you take megahydrate with anything, it delivers all of that stuff that I just said, all the coconut oil, the omega-3 fatty acids, right to your, and the lion's mane, right to your cells without oxidation, so you get the maximum benefit of it.
Beautiful. So we have to keep that oxidation thing in mind. And that's why, again, this protection of the neurological system is so important. When you get a vaccination, you are creating a whole lot of free radicals and inflammation in actually every part of the system. We're just talking about the brain at this moment. And we're confining it a little bit that way. Now, in 1988, Gabriel did publish an article on Alzheimer's disease using blue-green algae, only using blue-green algae because we're doing research on it. We took two people. One person was simply unable to dress themselves, couldn't watch TV, couldn't walk. It was really severe. And this is diagnosed Alzheimer's at Stanford University. I mean, classic diagnosis. I mean, it was blatant. Well, after 6 months on just the blue-green algae, okay, what we saw was we actually got a significant reversal. The person was able to dress themselves, have conversation, watch TV, which in this case was an improvement. Okay, exercise with their husband, be able to walk around the track. Very, very significant. And the other case was a lawyer who, and this is a sad story but good. He had rapid onset Alzheimer's. He went from a relatively high IQ to what they had measured in the traditional system of maybe 90. We gave him the blue-green algae. It stopped it in its tracks. Okay, 2 years later, because this is like a year study. 2 years later, I get a note from his wife. It started again. She says, I ran out of the blue-green algae and I was using spirulina. It's like spirulina is not an herb for the brain, is not an algae for the brain in the same way the blue-green algae is. And that's because the blue-green algae has a long chain omega-3 and DHA and EPA. Okay? And whatever else it has that really activates brain function. And so she went to spirulina and he went downhill. We weren't able to really, reverse it after that. It was a really sad story, but that's unfortunate. But we do have the herbs, we do have the things that can really, the superfoods that make a difference. And so we can think about that. We here at the tree also grow a lot of purslane. We put it in the salads because that's also probably the highest in the food easily available for salads and so forth that we can have. So we're getting the EPA and DHA. So all that really is available to us as vegans and as live fooders. So these are the simple things we can do to really, well, our interest is prevent Alzheimer's, prevent the senility. But simple things like hydrating so you don't become a prune brain is important. So when we say have salt, let's be practical. There's a lot of people who, tend to go to dehydration because they don't have the salt in their body to hold the water. Because salt, as David said earlier, attracts water and therefore holds water in the system, which is what you want if you're dehydrated. And it's a way of holding the hydration in the system. And that's why we say for vatas who tend to get dehydrated, and anyone over a certain age tends to move into a vata phase, whether you're kapha, pitta, or vata, salt becomes very, very important with age to maintain that hydration. You want to be 70% hydrated, not 60 or 55% hydrated, or 75% hydrated. And it's very important. So actually with that I'm going to have a little water.
Okay, are we on to the next question?
Are you ready for another one? This one kind of ties right into it, and it is on the subject of hydration and salt. If you said putting a pinch of salt in your water is a good way to get that mineral content, is it better to use just a pinch of salt, or is it better to make a Soleil concentrate? And could you explain what Soleil is for those who may not know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Soleil is a really important concept. Remember, Soleil is really talking about the soul or the energy of the sun, light, okay? And it's the primordial concentration of the primordial oceans from which our blood is a complete mirror. So Soleil, as we're talking about, is water that's at least 26% concentrated. What does that mean? You put a chunk of crystal, salt in water, and you keep adding it until the crystal doesn't continue to dissolve. That's usually about 26%. Then you take 1 teaspoon of that a day and add it to 8 ounces of water, and that's your Soleil. And that will upgrade the frequency of all your meridians for 24 hours. So we want to do this once a day. That's what Soleil is. So and we got this whole upgraded frequency. Remember, food is frequency, food is energy, and this Soleil is energy and frequency of the living primordial ocean, which is in every compartment of our body. Salt water is in every compartment of our body, so we're affecting the whole thing. We also have the universal antioxidant effect and all the electrons coming from it. But the most important is the harmonizing and overall upgrading pattern effect. Now, that's one thing that's important. Now, that's the minimum. Okay, that's the minimum. And it's like a frequency that we're talking about. Some people, which is probably most people, I think it's 85%, 80% of the public is mineral deficient. In 1936, the U.S. Congress said 90 9% of the U.S. public was mineral deficient. That's a very high percentage. Okay? And since 1936, I'm sure it's gotten worse because what we're looking at is that our soils are becoming more mineral deficient. So we're looking at perhaps a need for more salt in our system. Now, so what we're talking about is really a pinch, 1 to 3 times a day is probably sufficient to do that. To start upgrading. And then if people have specific deficiencies, like 80% of the public is deficient in magnesium, we're going to suggest, fine, take some extra magnesium. They're different things. That requires some kind of assessment. But this is a general way to upgrade the minerals, and that's the key to understand. What's your experience with that?
I think that's right on. It's like a general tonic for mineralization. Salt is. And this is what Dr. Walker figured out after 65 years of research, and Dr. Jensen as well, is that what really is getting people, especially in digestive disturbances, is salt deficiency. And your body, the digestive tract, it's kind of interesting because you would think, how much salt can a plant take? A lot more than you think. A lot more than you think. I mean, I've watered trees with straight ocean water, no dilution at all, every month, once a month, no reaction at all. It wasn't even close to being too much for them to deal with. Well, if you invert the plant and flip it around and turn it inside out, that's us. Our roots are turned inside out, so we're picking up soil of what's moving through our digestive tract. And so to have a lot of salt at that interface is good for the plant, and it's good for our intestines as well. It's the same principle at work here. And probably the most important mineral for digestion is salt out of anything. Which is, that's really amazing because when we're dealing with remineralizing ourselves, we ain't going to get nothing across that intestinal barrier if we don't have enough salt to help osmotically move nutrients and minerals into our system from our intestines. And the same could be said with a tree and a plant. Now, a plant will, if there's no salt in the soil, will have to use a trick, like a biological transmutation, in order to create an environment where it can actually get the salts in or get the minerals into itself. And this is why plants are genetically more complex than mammals or any animal, is because they have to do things like that to survive in more varied climates. But for us, we control that soil, which is our food, and the main ingredient of that soil should be salt, to some degree in terms of minerals. So I just want to put that out there because we're a plant that figured out how to move around, is kind of how we're designed. Yeah, we're a moving plant.
Okay, next.
On the topic of Ormus, Susan would like to know, what daily Ormus combination prescription do you recommend?
Depends on what kind of Ormus product you're playing around with. If you take, do you have the little bottle? If you take that little bottle, where'd that go? Put it in the pocket.
Do I have it?
Put it in the pocket. This kind of a thing, this is just one concentrate of gold. This is an important thing to understand. If you take something like this, which is just gold pushed back into its Ormus form, so it's a single specific mineral, this is so reactive that you can put it in your morning water or take it in the morning before you have any food and it will go right into your system. But as soon as you start eating anything and you start producing digestive acids, the digestive acids can actually interfere with the absorption of this stuff. And in fact, they can flip it. There's so much energy in digestive acid, they can actually flip it back into a metal, which wouldn't hurt you. It would be like colloidal gold, which is fine. But it doesn't give you the magic of the Ormus. So what I do personally, over all these different years, I've tried different things. I've tried taking this, adding it to alcohol and doing it under the tongue, and you get the absorption that way. It works great. That's fine. You can just do this straight under the tongue. That works fine as well. It works better for me if I literally drink this first thing in the morning before I produced any digestive acids, or added it to my morning drinking water. When you're dealing with a specific isolated Ormus mineral like this, there is a cross reaction with MSM. And the general theory is that MSM either reacts with the Ormus or it interferes with its absorption. So what you would do is you would literally take those on other ends of the day, 12 hours apart, or you would not take MSM while you're doing a specific Ormus mineral supplement like this. Now, if you're doing things that have a high amount of Ormus in them, like bee pollen, you don't need to worry about any of that. You can take bee pollen with MSM together, there's no problem. It's just the isolated Ormus mineral and MSM can interact with each other, or interfere with each other. What else? Well, you could also do, for example, you could take Dead Sea salt, take sodium hydroxide, like I mentioned, dropper it in and raise the pH of that Dead Sea salt in water. So you take the Dead Sea salt, you put it in water, you supersaturate the solution, you swirl it all in there, and then you just dropper a little bit of sodium hydroxide in there, so you raise the pH to about 10.5. Once you've got it about 10.5, then you can stop, and then there's going to be a precipitate at the bottom. It's going to be a white stuff that's going to be at the bottom. You can pour off the water and decant it, meaning you pour back in distilled water, pour it off again, pour back in distilled water after everything settles, and then you could literally drink that. Now the problem with that is you get hit with a hydroxide, which is for some free radicals, and you can get hit with too much magnesium if you do that over and over and over again. So that's the kind of thing, if you're doing it that way, which some people sell that as an Ormus supplement, is probably not the best thing ever. It's probably not a good idea to do that kind of Ormus stuff. A really good way to get Ormus out of nature, by the way, is just to drink spring water at the source, or to have Ormus trap water off of creeks, rivers, streams, or springs. Trap water or vortex trap water is actually available online. You can find that if you look for Vortrap water out there. So there's different ways to go about it, and these are things that come up. Again, ocean water has Ormus in it. You could drink ocean water, but it also has bromine in it, which you don't want too much of. And then you could also eat salt, which has Ormus in it too. Sea salt has Ormus in it. Himalayan salt has Ormus in it. Many different salt compounds all over the world contain Ormus in it. So that's a way of getting it. But if you want to get a high dosage, probably the best way and the safest way is to go towards the foods that have a high fraction of it: noni, aloe vera, and the bee products, especially bee pollen and royal jelly.
Perfect. That's great. Complete answer. Don't need to say anything. Go ahead.
The next question comes from Philip regarding water alkalizers and ionizers, and he wants to know, why do people feel better, and what are the disadvantages of these machines, and are they all bad?
You can go first.
Okay, well, let's hit the good part of, first of all, I think the Kangen alkalizing system is of the best of those alkaline water systems that then microcluster the water and ionize the water. And the reason why people can feel better is because there's a microclustering of the water in there, so the water becomes a little bit more organized. However, and therefore it'll have like kind of a pseudo low ORP rating, which is optimal oxygen reduction potential. And ORP, the lower it is, the better it is. And these machines will spit out a high pH water, but it'll be microclustered with a low ORP, which is the good side. The bad side is the alkalinity. And this is something that Gabriel and I both agree on, and I've been kind of on this for a long time, of like, the best way to get water is either spring water or Vortrap water, trap water that has a low ORP, which means it has great antioxidants, and has a low pH, which is where water is naturally, 5.8, 6.0, 6.2. And therefore, when you're dealing with a real high alkaline water, we both agree, then you're introducing free radicals into your body. When you have that high pH water, like, let's just say it comes in at 8.5 or something like that, 9.0, you have hydroxyl free radicals, or OH groups, or not, another way of saying this is not enough hydrogen in the water. What is hydrogen? Well, hydrogen is about hydration. I mean, look at the word hydration, or look at the word hydrogen, generator of water. Hydrogen is the number one antioxidant. Spring water is loaded in hydrogen, which is what makes it so magical. And that's where we really want to focus, is more on getting more of the hydrogen and less of the hydroxyl free radicals, which is OH, which is alkaline water. I hope that's clear.
It's clear, and just to kind of complement that, the Japanese research has actually shown that high pH water, high pH means high or alkaline water, is detrimental. And that's why you're going to see on some of the water that, that are buying, so to speak, a little saying you should only have one bottle a day because it may not be good for your health. There is real research behind it. Why isn't it good for your health? Interesting question. Why does it make you initially feel better? One theory is that the high alkaline water, which is high in free radicals, actually kills cells. Well, when cells die, they actually release energy. So you may be getting, this is a theory, you may be just getting a release of energy that you have an immediate sense of a hit. But in the long term, you're breaking down the system. And that's the way to think about it. But let's go back to understanding water from this other perspective. The perspective is water is hydrating, high in hydrogen. What do we know? What are you interested in hydrogen? Well, hydrogen is very high in electrons. Remember, the name of the game is about electrons. So the universal antioxidant that we look at every day is water, but not if it's alkaline. That's a universal free radical producer. And we know free radicals are destructive to every part of the system because they destroy the cell membranes. They steal electrons from everyone in the system and they break it down. That's called inflammation. So I think this is what the initial Japanese research shows, is that you're actually inflaming the system. But initially, that inflammation may feel like more energy because cells release energy when they die. Okay? So going back to it, when we have water that is 7 or less, because that's neutral, 7 is neutral pH, then what we want, then we're getting high hydrogen water. Now we'll go a little further that we want hydronium ions in the water. So in spiritual nutrition, Gabriel has a whole chapter, but summing up really simply is in 1 gallon of distilled water, because it's so hard, people live in the city, it's hard to get decent spring water, is 1 gallon, we put a smidgen of the authentic salt, whatever we say, and that will bring it to 50 parts per million. At 50 parts per million, we have H3O, optimum water, plus you have to energize it, and you have to, increase its structure and all the things that we do, like with crystal energy and so forth. And you stir it to add the vortex energy, the implosive energy, and you bless it and put it out in the moonlight. Unless you have javelinos where we are, they knock over the water and take it.
They do that over here, huh?
They do that a lot. And so we just put it, to energize the water, we'll put it on a tachyon disc. Because during javelina's system, when they're looking for water, you put it outside, they're going to go after it. We won't go into that story. But that's what happens. So then you have H3O. Now, high hydrogen is high electron. It's high antioxidant. Okay? And that's what we want. Now, that hydrogen water goes into the cells and supplies hydrogen intracellularly, because the inside of a cell needs to be, I don't want to say acid, but because it has to be high electron. Outside needs to be alkaline. So you have that transmembrane differential. And we mentioned 70 millivolts is normal. Less than 70 is really unhealthy. And above, up to 200 is very, very healthy. And it also replenishes the DNA, because the DNA to work right needs lots of electrons. That's why the ormus is so important for activating the DNA and reversing the mutations that happen in the DNA, which is what you see in some of the theories about cancer, is that it's a DNA mutation in particular cells. So the ormus reverses that. The high hydrogen water reverses that because it brings electrons in to the cell to repair the DNA. So now you start to begin to see a bigger picture of why this isn't, why the hydroxy water, now it's a trick. People think, oh, I need to have alkaline blood. Well, you do. You need 7.46, okay, for optimal brain function. But the way to get it is to bring in high alkaline minerals. That you have, salt is very alkalinizing, for example. That's a good way to get it. The high alkalinizing minerals are potassium, magnesium, and calcium. Those are some of the big hitters that alkalinize. So when you're well mineralized, you will be well alkalinized in an appropriate way. If you try to trick the system by taking sodium hydroxide, there's people out there, you got to alkalize, they're missing the point, which is it isn't just tricking the system by drinking alkaline water and, temporarily improving your pH of your blood because you put alkaline into it. You do it by adding minerals to the system and salt to the system, which will naturally, and in a healthy way, alkalize, but also bring in the electrons into the system. And that's why we don't encourage the hydroxy waters. We don't encourage people taking sodium hydroxy drops, which some people are actually selling as big and good for you because it alkalizes you. It doesn't. I mean, it does temporarily alkalize your blood, but it's not the way to go when you want to build health. Remember, health is a frequency. Chaos in the system is disease. You know, harmony in the system is health, frequency, harmony. And this is why we're suggesting these overall harmonic things like salt to build it up. Anything more you want to add? I mean,
I think that was pretty
good.
Comprehensive.
Okay. Next.
Andrew would like to know, on the subject of alkalinity and acidity, what is the best method of measuring the acidity and alkalinity of foods?
Go ahead.
Okay, the best analytical method to measure the acidity or alkalinity of food is to look at the preponderance of what minerals the food contains. Now, the thing is...
It's called ash. It's called, measuring the ash and taking the pH of the ash. That's the technical way.
Yeah, so what you do is, like, for example, foods that are really high in calcium and magnesium would come out alkaline, or higher in calcium and magnesium than, say, phosphorus. Okay, so that's a very key piece of it. What are the alkaline minerals? They're the major minerals. It's going to be magnesium and calcium. So if a food is really high in magnesium and calcium, higher than phosphorus, then that food will generally be considered alkaline. What kind of food is that? Because we're not going to sit here and we're not going to go through every single food in the world and turn it into an ash and figure this out for you. It's actually obvious because foods have different principles of alkalinity or acidity based on where they come from on the plant. The seed generally has more phosphorus than it has magnesium and calcium, so it's going to be more acidic. The leaf is going to have more calcium and magnesium, so it's going to be more alkaline. That's a kind of an easy to understand way of differentiating everything in nature between the leaf and the seed. Now, a root generally, because it's going to have to store energy in the winter or store energy at part of the time of the year, is going to have some phosphorus. And the phosphorus generally is going to be preponderant more. It's going to be more of the phosphorus than there is calcium and magnesium. So roots are generally slightly acidic. What about fruits? Fruits can be kind of neutral in more one way or more the other way. It just really depends. Sometimes a fruit like an orange will have a high amount of calcium, but in the person, because they can't tolerate citric acid, if the food might be acidic to them. So on an acid-alkaline balance, hey, it looks like it's alkaline, great, but in the person, it doesn't really equate to be that easy. Generally, with this acid-alkaline balance, it comes down to two ideas. And if you get these ideas, you don't ever have to worry about that stuff again. And that is that there's really only two alkaline foods, vegetables and herbs. Everything else is either neutral or acidic. And if you get that, then you'll figure it out. And so that means every day you've got to have your salad. A vegetable juice is a great idea, and some herbs of some sort. The medicinal mushrooms, by the way, are alkaline. So then you could kind of look at that and go, okay, I'll have some medicinal mushrooms, I'll have my vegetable juice, I'll have my salad. And
the algae too.
And the algae would be based on their minerals, are alkaline. Spirulina, though, can be acidic in certain people. That's just the way it is. And so you kind of look at all that and you go, okay, here's what's going to make me alkaline. If I have my salad today, I have my vegetable juice, I have my herbs. From that, you can kind of go, okay, now I'm going to be alkaline, or at least heading in the right direction, because the preponderance of my diet, if you have those three things in a day, that's a big chunk of your diet. That's going to help you move out of acidity towards alkalinity. In general, we grew up on a root, seed, and muscle diet with a little bit of with some Elmer's glue on it, otherwise known as dairy products. And dairy products, yeah, it's alkaline because it has calcium, but you can't absorb it.
Let me clarify. We're not joking about Elmer's glue. Casein, which is 87% of the protein in milk, is the major component of Elmer's glue. So we're not joking. It is Elmer's glue.
That's why there's a cow on Elmer's glue. Seriously. Anyway, when you're on the root, seed, and muscle diet, whatever that looks like, for example, somebody goes into a burger joint, they get their hamburger and fries. The hamburger itself is the muscle. The bread itself is a seed product, and the root is the French fries, which is a potato product. So it's root, seeds, and muscle. So preponderance of that is acidic, And in general, most people are way into the acidity zone because they've never had enough calcium and magnesium in their life in order to bring that more to balance. And to that end, really also what's alkaline is silica, which would bring you also more into the alkaline side.
I think what's confusing for people is, oh, you're acidic or you're alkaline. Well, each component of the body has different needs. The inside of a cell is going to be acidic. That's actually good. The outside of the cell should be alkaline. Our urine, healthy urine, first urine in the morning is 6.4 to 6.8. That's acidic, but that's healthy. Most people are running 5. That means there are a lot of toxins coming out. When people fast, actually initially their urine gets really, really acidic. Then maybe by the end of the fast, or maybe by the end of the second or third fast, then it starts to turn alkaline, which means you've gotten rid of a lot of your acidic toxins that are there. The blood should be optimally 7.46. That's the venous blood. The saliva should be around 6.8, 6.4, 6.8. It could be a little higher. It could be 7. So these are components, and each of those components represents, in a sense, different aspects of the system. So kind of keeping that in mind, when we talk about acidity, we're probably really talking about acidity as it's happening in the tissues from eating your meat and potato diet. And you're not talking about the blood pH, because the blood body will do anything to keep the blood pH at 7.46 because the brain doesn't work right after that, if it's too low or too high. So in a sense, we can talk about acids building up in the muscle tissue, for example, as what we mean by acidity, or in your sinuses and in your lymph. In a sense, that's kind of what we're talking about, rather than the 3 components. But if you get acidic enough, all of the components become urine, blood, and saliva become acidic. That's more serious, and that's what we see in a lot of people. Just to kind of define that, because people use it so loosely, as it is.
Or alkalize or die, things like that.
Alkalize or die, right. Now, if you're too alkaline, which is possible, Gabriel's done that, because his body tends to run alkaline. You run 7.2, 7.4, you actually can have much more muscle spasm. You develop a calcium magnesium deficiency, so there's lots of spasm. You can't hold chiropractic adjustments as well. You tend to get spacey and hyper, and it's like ungrounded. These are symptoms of that. And how I discovered it was that when I was first playing with this in the 60s, 70s, is I started to get twitching of my eye. I said, well, what is that? And then, that's after going to my foods, and I realized after I started checking around, wow, you're too alkaline, and you have created a calcium magnesium deficiency, so you're getting twitching, or what we call fasciculation in the muscles. So if that's happening to you, you are probably calcium magnesium deficient, and you've gotten too alkaline. So being too alkaline isn't good either. What we find is if the blood is 7.46, the brain, the neurons are going to work optimally. Too alkaline or too acid does not work optimally. And that's how we have to see it. We've got to find that balance. So alkalize or die, there's truth to it, but the fact is you're too alkaline. People get so freaked out about, I got alkalized, that they don't get this a normal process. And just like Dave was saying, eat your vegetables, take your sea vegetables, take your mushrooms, do all these things that are going to naturally alkalinize you. And the algaes pretty much. Now, just a statement to clarify, the algaes are alkalinizing, and depending on your constitutional type, your algaes or all the foods can actually make your blood acid. So it's a little tricky. But if you're in the oxidizer system, even protein will make you more alkaline. But if you're in parasympathetic or sympathetic, what we call autonomic nervous, and that's a whole discussion, you'll actually, these things can make you acid. So there are some variations, and you have to study how your body responds to these things, and particularly that's your blood. So just to kind of think about, in general, in the deep tissue and your muscles and so forth, it's acid, alkaline, these things are going to alkalinize, they always should alkalinize your muscles, or they may acidify your blood. So there are all these different systems. We have to keep in mind whenever we're talking about it.
The next question is from Nairi, and she says there are 3 types of consumers. What products would you suggest for, number 1, the raw living new person, the must-haves, number 2, a person on a budget, and number 3, money is no object whatsoever?
Okay, first of all, Nairi, that's her name?
She's here.
That's
She's
me.
the master's student.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, your name's Nairi?
Yeah.
God, you're the second person I've ever met in my life with the name Nairi. Awesome. Okay, I guess,
Myri's one of the master's students. We're sitting in this class today are all the vegan live food master's students in the midst of the 27-day intensive. And David is actually one of the professors in our master's program. So that's we're combining a few things.
okay, so I guess we'll start with the must-have, like brand new, must-have everything. What is in the game? Well, I would definitely stock your cupboards full of all the seaweeds, because they're things you can store. I would get lots of different seeds, like wheatgrass seeds and barley seeds and sunflower seeds and things that you can sprout and grow, because when you start playing with that, you're going to need seeds. I definitely recommend that you get a good cornucopia of herbs that suit you, that are appropriate for you. And what that means is get the stuff that's well studied, has huge amounts of data behind it, time proven, and is of the top 10 or top 20 herbs in the world. For example, ginseng, reishi mushroom, astragalus, pau d'arco, cat's claw, nettles, oat straw, horsetail, that kind of a thing. You just have the top 10 herbs that you feel like are being in front of you, or easy to get for you, or that you know about. And then superfoods, get them all and try them all so you can find out what works for you. That includes cacao and all the chocolate byproducts of cacao that are all raw and organic. Goji berry, organic goji berries. People on a budget say, well, I can get the wild crafted goji berries. That's a pet peeve of mine, because I know that's a complete lie.
Can you clarify that? Because I don't think people know, where do you get non-organic goji berries? Are you talking about the Chinese market? What are we talking about?
Yeah, well, first of all, anything, those like bags of goji berries you get at the Chinese market are often, they're definitely sprayed with sulfur dioxide. They've been grown with pesticides, and very likely they've been dyed. So that's out, forget about that, that's out of the picture. Not only that, you can tell just by the way they taste, they're awful. What you really want to look for is organic, certified organic goji berries, because the wild crafted stuff is not wild crafted. It's grown domestically on farms, and it's sprayed with sulfur dioxide and probably a lot of other stuff. But I know for sure it's sprayed with sulfur dioxide because we've tested them. And out of 15 brands, 12 failed the test. Completely failed.
Are these brands that are labeled organic?
No, these are brands that are labeled wild crafted or Tibetan goji berries or whatever. And people think, well, it's goji berries, it's clean or whatever. And it's just like any other fruit that's out there. You wouldn't go out and pick a non-organic apple in most cases, because you'd look at it and go, I don't know if I want an alar coating over my teeth right now, or whatever wax or whatever those things are, whatever they put on that stuff. And it's like that with goji berries too. So you got to get a certified organic goji berry, and I just want to put that out there because what can get so excited about superfoods, we forget about organic. And I know Gabriel and I are super big believers in organic as baseline, absolute baseline. Maca, definitely get organic maca. Spirulina, blue-green algae, chlorella. There's now organic chlorella is available. Oceans Alive marine phytoplankton, which isn't certified organic because there is no certified organic USDA standard. However, it is an organic product. I would definitely recommend looking into the bee products in your area that are certified organic. Honey, bee pollen, and royal jelly. Royal jelly has no organic certification. You have to find a farmer who you trust and you know where it's coming from. That's a really important food. And then noni products can be certified organic. If you can get them, get them. And aloe vera can be certified organic. And actually, we distribute big leaves of organic aloe vera at Sun Food. So that's a place you can get that just delivered to your house. So these are things just to have as a staple. Now, when I go into my herb cupboard, I have hundreds of herbs. I mean, it's like a whole cornucopia of stuff that I dried from the summer before, stuff that I've collected over the years, and they're all in sealed glass containers far away from EMF fields. And the other day I did a 3-hour phone call in my herb room. And all I did was I was just in this beautiful maze of herbs, opening things while I'm talking on the phone and just checking out what is all there. Now that allows me to have choices and allows you to have choices. So when you look at what you got to play with, you go, oh, I got all these choices. I can start playing with these recipes. I can get these books out. I can, now I actually have, you can also get all the condiments like the sea salt, the Himalayan salt. These are all important things to have. And you have the whole cornucopia and you go, okay, now I can start playing. Now if you're on a budget, what you do is you start growing things. Actually, one of the things that a friend of mine said, actually Chad said this, he said, one of the reasons why you're on a budget is because you're not eating superfoods. and that's really true, actually.
That's Chad's son, what you're talking.
No, I'm talking about Chad Vandenberg.
Oh, Chad Vandenberg, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, because if you really want access to all your faculties, you can't get that from celery and lettuce. I mean, celery and lettuce are great. It's all good, and you have to have it. It's part of your diet. But it doesn't have that oomph, that extra factor, that thing that's going to blow open your imagination. The downloads of music, for example, that are in the cacao bean, the downloads of herbalism that are in the goji berry that are intrinsic to the food itself. So you can get these things. It's just, I used to go out and blow $60 a night at a bar, for like alcohol. I mean, it's like, and pizza in the middle of the night, $20, boom, gone, just like that.
Now you're doing a bar of cacao.
Yeah, now it's a bar. Now it's a different bar, but it's still, but it's the same money. And when you really look at it, now I used to be so aggro about how I spent money. I mean, I read all the books on how you make money and all this stuff, and it says write down every time you spend money. So I actually recorded every single dollar I spent for years. So I knew exactly how much money I spent on food every month, every week, every day. And when I really equated it out, what I figured out, I started doing that back in the days before I was a raw foodist, way back, I figured out that I was actually spending less buying the best food ever because I wouldn't be blowing it on popcorn at a movie, a pizza in the middle of the night, $60 at a bar, or whatever. And next thing I knew, I was saving about $200 a month. And so even at the highest, I was spending like $400 or $500 on foods and superfoods, and it worked out to be about the same, if not saving a little bit by eating raw and living foods. And if you want to try that yourself, you do exactly what I did, which is write down every time you spend money, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
The issue about what I can afford is a really interesting issue. Can you afford to be sick? What does it cost to miss a week of work? What does it cost to miss a day of work? And suddenly, the score changes. As you miss a week of work, I mean, that could be hundreds and hundreds or thousands of dollars. If you aren't functioning well, let's say you're still going to work, but you're not functioning well, you make wrong decisions at work because your brain isn't working right, is this saving money? If you get a serious disease because you're eating junk food or food that isn't organic is cheaper. It's not cheaper. Another way of thinking about it is you probably get, it's going to vary according to the study, but maybe double the amount of nutrients in organic food, certainly minerals. It's not, you're really paying the equal amount, so to speak, if it's twice as much. Organic food isn't twice as much. That's just one way of doing it. One of the things that we're going to start here, because people have donated a greenhouse to us that we're going to really promote for teaching families or groups of 5 to 7 people how to grow their own. We have real threats going on. It's called Codex Alimentarius, who's trying to basically outlaw anything organic. And actually, it's actually written into the law, which hopefully will not be accepted even if other parts pass, basically saying you can't even grow your own food. I mention that because people need to pay attention to the issue of Codex Alimentarius on the culture of life, community, GabrielCousens.com. We're going to have ways so you can support this whole effort to go beyond, to not allow this to happen in the United States. We won't be facing this, but we want people to grow their own. That's the least expensive way to do it. Take some effort, take some energy, but it's organic. you know it's not GMO, and let's say it's up to 70%, 80% of all the junk food has GMO foods in it, parts of foods in it. So it's like a very serious problem, very serious, because our bodies are not designed to take in GMO foods. We're just not designed to do that. And in the little bit of research that's been allowed to happen, I'm going to say a little bit, Dr. Pizazic in Scotland fed GMO potatoes to rats. And within a very short time, 10 days, 2 weeks, a month, something like that, the rats began to degenerate in terms of heart, adrenals, thyroid, immune system. They actually began to shrink in size, and also their chemistries began to shift. What does that tell us for all those people eating GMO foods out there today? Because they're being overwhelmed with it, the body's chemistries are not really able to cope with it, besides other issues that go on. So when in the United States, they don't allow labeling of these things in a way you can figure out what's going on. They don't allow labeling of food irradiation, and because they know people won't buy it. And therefore, theory is, well, we don't want to tell people the truth because they may actually act on it and not buy our product. And it's like, oh, this is interesting thinking. But nevertheless, that's the thinking, because we're dealing with a culture of death consciousness which says wealth for the few, poor health for the many. The value system is there. So these are the things we have to think about when we're talking about what are you going to do. Where are your values? That's when we ask that question. Yeah, you'll save food on going organic. You'll save money on going organic, not at the exact purchase, but on the results of a better functioning mind, a better functioning body, and having a whole lot less disease. That's just a simple way to go about it. So that's another way to think about it.
Last weekend I spent a good period of time, maybe about 45 minutes, putting together a document, which I'm going to put up on my PowerPoint presentations from now on, which is what does it actually cost to get a heart transplant surgery, or heart valve surgery, or to have coronary bypass done, or what does it actually cost to have a tumor removed? What does it actually cost for chemotherapy? What is the actual average cost for a doctor's visit, which is $90 to $230 just to walk into a doctor's office? So when you really start adding those costs up, I mean, a friend of mine spent $230 just to walk into a doctor's office to get her pinky looked at because her pinky was broken by the BART system on the San Francisco transport system, and basically they owe her money now, so it has to be looked at by a doctor. It was $230 just to walk in there and have the guy look at her pinky.
For 5 minutes.
For 5 minutes. Now that right there very clearly puts into perspective what Gabriel's saying here, which is our values. When you put everything in perspective, it's like, actually what I spend all my money on is food, which is hardly actually anything. Now luckily I'm in the superfood business, so and that's a great way to get superfoods for cheap. Get in the superfood business, right? Then you have it for low price. I get it at cost. My office won't let me get it for free anymore, which is a bummer. But it's at a lower cost. However, I don't really have a bill. Like, I don't go to the store, by the way, I'm just putting this out there, I don't go to the store and buy vegetables anymore because the weeds growing in my garden are better vegetables than anything I can buy in a store, and it's 100% free, it doesn't cost me anything. So I just go out with a bowl and just pick a bunch of weeds, which are really the best vegetables for us. And in fact, whatever's growing in your front yard, as long as you're not like, in chemtrail Disneyland, whatever's growing out in front of your house is really what you should be eating, because that's Mother Nature's way, or God's way of saying, like, hey, here's what you need over here. No matter how much you try to mow it down and kill it, destroy it, spray it, whatever, it's still going to come up and say, hey, here's the dandelion, you need to clean your liver. Or thistle. I had 3 thistles growing out right outside my window, and I was like, oh, I must need a liver cleanse. I mean, that's kind of the message that I get. And it's right there, it's free, so I get that. And what I grow in my garden isn't like lettuce and stuff like that, although I have a few of those just for fun. But it's mostly like tomatoes, cucumbers, corn, interesting varieties of peas, stuff that's not growing wildly right in the front yard, if that makes sense. And that it really makes it interesting, because your bills just go, I mean, I basically live on no money. And if you looked at my wallet right now, there's not even $1 in my wallet. It's zero. I have nothing in my wallet. Because I don't need the money. Because what do you need the money on? Isn't that interesting? I mean, that's such a value inversion. You know, people are so wound up about the money game. It's unbelievable because they're coming out of a civilization that's all about, you know, some kind of a, you know, what, I don't even know. It's hard to even really, like, you're going to spend your money on a yacht or something, or on a Ferrari, or what exactly? On a house? Or what? I mean, how about a garden? You know, it's just the values are so out of whack, it's hard to really relate anymore for me.
This is culture of death, culture of life. David's talking from the culture of life, and that's what we're talking about. It's a value-based approach which values life, your own life, and the life of the planet. So it's good. Okay.
This may be the last question, depending on how long you guys decide to talk on it.
You're talking to the wrong people here. We can go hours in any question.
Well, on this segment anyway, we're getting close to 1 o'clock. So this is from Mark. What do you think is the nature of the relationship between disease and spirituality?
I'd like to address that first. I mean, it's intimately related. It's intimately related. I have never bought that just because you're spiritual, you don't need to pay attention to your body. I mean, I never bought that from the beginning. I definitely believe there's something very wrong when a spiritual leader dies of diabetes. There's something very wrong about that. To me personally, that's my own prejudice. It's my own judgments maybe. But I feel that that's total. There's something very out of balance about that. Like our soul is in this physical body for a reason. And if we take care of our physical body and are actually here, alive, being here now, which we cannot be if we're out literally or metaphorically or metaphysically out to lunch, so to speak, or if we have a disease, which we cannot fully be here because we're in too much pain in here, then we're not here, we're somewhere else. But if we're actually fully here, then we are actually truly spiritual, right? That's the whole thing about being here now and the power of now and being in the moment. We've got to get into the moment and all that kind of stuff. First of all, that's all mostly gobbledygook. I mean, really, in most cases, people are in such physical pain right here that they're not actually here. They're checked out somewhere over there. So there's a strong relationship between being super healthy and actually being spiritual and being totally present, which is in this place now. And there's a very strong relationship between being unspiritual or not spiritual and being ill. A strong relationship, which means that at some level of our consciousness, our spiritual, our whole psychosomatic build-up, that we are missing a huge chunk of what it truly means to be spiritual. And by the way, there's a million meanings to being spiritual, right? Like, you know, we lump like dwarves and fairies in with the same thing as like God, in with the same thing as a church, in with the same thing as prayers, in with the same thing as affirmations, in with the same thing as like loving each other. That's all called spirituality. You know, that's just a big lump of gunk, and what can we make really sense of that? To me, spirituality is direct connection between you and your Creator, and the best way to directly connect between you and your Creator is to eat food that your Creator created as it is naturally original. Putting your hands in the earth, which is the creation, being in the creation, actually being on the creation instead of having buffers of technology between you and the creation. Being in relationships with everybody else around you, that's a real relationship where you're not lying, tricking somebody, whatever. You're just straightforward with what's going on. So it's a real honest relationship. Trusting and having faith in the future and hope in the future, and literally parlaying your own life, your cash, your future on trust and faith in what's going to happen down the road, right? Like risking based on faith. That, to me, is spiritual. So that's kind of how I look at it. And then also being capable of listening to other people, being capable of actually being present with other people is spiritual, and having enough cognizance to understand that, you put the mask on yourself first, then you help the child next to you, right? You got to save yourself if we're going to save the environment. So what Thich Nhat Hanh says, which I think is amazing, in order to save the environment, we have to save the environmentalist. That kind of a thinking. Right? So to me, that's what comes up in that, what's the relationship between spirituality and disease? There's no question that when somebody has miasms that they've inherited through their lineage and or they've created it in their own lifetime, that will eventually show up as a disease. And when I say miasm, I'm talking about an emotional distortion in a relationship where they have primarily with their mom or dad. And if somebody's carrying hatred against their dad, they're going to develop liver disease. If someone's carrying some kind of problem with their mom, they're going to develop heart problems. That has been shown and proven. That is, we are psychospiritual beings, and our emotional disturbances do actually land in our physical body in some way. And in order to become physically healed, also we have to be emotionally healed. So if that's related to the spiritual question, I say definitely that's part of the deal for sure.
Well, that's a very, very complete answer, and gave a complete agrees with everything. And I'm going to, having written a book called Spiritual Nutrition, obviously we have something to say about this. So we're going to try and bring it in a real simple way, because David's already given some of the details. So not to be redundant. So in a sense, we will define it, and this is the kind of culture of life definition, which is our focus. We are God-centered in our work. The focus of our life is that God. Now, who's that God? We have immanent and transcendent, okay? And we're saying the ability to have a greater and greater communication with both the immanent, the sense of the divine within us, as well as the sense of the divine in the, let's say, the whole living cosmos, which we call for fun, the biophoton field, which is a quantum physics reality. But since the bottom line is people whose life is focused on enhancing their experience of the divine, kind of making that in a simple way. Okay, and we got an agreement from our local cat. Okay, good. So having that in mind, and the next question is, the question that we pose in spiritual nutrition is, how do we eat in a way to become a superconductor of the divine? That's a simple way of phrasing it. What we've observed, and I'm going to say we because David's talking about the same thing, is that when people eat a live food diet, they have a much higher percentage of opening up to the divine. One of our master's students a few years ago did a survey, and basically 86% of the people who are just 80% live food for 2 years, 87% felt there was a definite increase in their spiritual life, spiritual focus, and spiritual interest, as well as their emotional balance and their intellectual ability, as well as their general health improvement. But we're really talking about the spiritual focus. So that is what tends to happen. When people go on a live food diet, they tend to open up more to the spiritual realms. So that's just an observation that we've seen again and again and again. And I think there's some validity to that as much as we can measure it, which is simply taking polls of this is a study with 520 people. That's a fairly decent study. Now, Jesus said that we are light beings, in essence. We're activating the light body. So when we are eating live food and living in this more culture of life, and Gabriel likes to call it culture of life and liberation way, what happens is we begin to transform our gross physical body. It's an alchemical transformation. It's the deep alchemy, so that it becomes less and less gross, and more it starts to liberate and actuate the light body that's within. The light body's always there, but it's been covered up. It's always there. Peace is always there. We just make a lot of noise. So what is peace? Quieting the noise of the mind so we can experience the peace. In the same way, we are activating the light body, our access to the life body, when we are eating the live food, the high ormus foods, the superfoods. They open up our access. And of course, the less we eat, the more access we have, because the gross body begins to disappear, and we're alchemically changed, the deeper alchemically, into accessing the light body. Now, the light body is the doorway to the cosmic body. Think about it that way. So the more we're in touch with that, and that's why Gabriel uses the word divine presence, that now has is just the very beginning steps of this whole thing. We are multidimensional beings, and we are also living the past, present, and the future simultaneously. And as multidimensional beings, we have to be in the physical plane, and we have astral plane, we have mental plane, we have the spiritual planes. That's all of who we are. All that begins to open up as we start to make that access with the light body, and then that's a doorway through which we, in a sense, begin to communicate with all the higher bodies. And there's no question, through our direct experience, through our polls, through observation, that when we eat this way, we're opening up the access. We're accessing not only the light body, but I'm going to say the living biophoton field. Now, we are all biophotons, okay? And there's a field in which we, let's say, precipitate out of. And when we start, and live food has the most amount of biophotons, okay? The research that's done on biophotons is showing that, if you're doing junk food, you got about 1,000 biophotons radiating out. If you're a baby, a newborn, you're about 43,000. If you're eating good organic food and you're adult, you're about 20,000. Okay? If you go live food, you're about 83,000. And if you're doing the kind of super diet we're talking about, some of the research shows you're about 114,000. That's very significant. So just live food puts you 80 times more than a junk fooder. The more biophotons you have in your being, okay, what happens is it enhances our conscious communication with the living biophoton field, which is in essence the cosmos. So everything begins to open up with this way. This is kind of Gabriel's theory about it. Now, we haven't proved that yet, but what we do know in observation is the more people eat this way, the more they open up to the different dimensions. And the light body is the doorway to all the dimensions. So that's how we see it. We're multidimensional beings. The now is kind of the very beginning. You kind of be present, but how are you present to all the dimensions? Are you doing past, present, and future simultaneously? In a sense, those are the things that start to develop as our consciousness begins to go. So we'll expand. So we're, in a sense, walking in all the worlds simultaneously. It's we have the non-dual and we have the dual, and we're both dual and non-dual simultaneously. And we walk, and I'm going to use the term between the belima and the ma, between the nothing and the something all the time. And we're the light in between, accessing all those levels. So in Gabriel's experience, there's a direct correlation between what we do. And as David has always quoted, we are what we eat. And our consciousness reflects explicitly what we eat. Now, does that mean that if somebody gets sick, they're not spiritual? Well, we have to be careful with that, because we have Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, Ramakrishna, all acknowledged kind of saints and enlightened beings, all dying of cancer. What happened? Well, we have to look at that and say, well, still people have karmas that go on. There's a mystery. But when we're eating this way, we're going to minimize the expression of that karma in our lives. We're going to eat in a way that's going to minimally activate the disease of karma, the chaos of karma. And that's what we're talking about here. But it doesn't mean you're going to be bulletproof because you eat live food. It doesn't mean that. We have these things that we have to work through. But what it means is, whatever karmas you have on the physical plane, they're going to be minimized and more easily to move through that. So we should never be embarrassed because we have disease, but what we want to look at and think about is how do we minimize it? How do we show when we've had a health challenge that being on live food, we just can't really blow through it? Your arm, you break your arm, it heals in a short time, but you still had to break your arm. That was your karma. Okay, that's what it is. But you're going to heal in 3 weeks instead of 6 months. That's how we kind of look at it. So, and there's different levels of karma. We create karma. You're going to eat a lot of sugar, you're going to get diabetes. Okay, that's clear. We're going to be talking about that when we get back from lunch. I won't talk about it before we eat lunch. We'll talk about it after. But the point is, that's an immediate karma. Okay, we have destiny karma. we have the karma of our whole life. Destiny karma is really hard to undo. For example, Swami Nityananda, who was Muktananda's guru, was born enlightened. It was a great, being. He had arthritis. He'd walk around like this, didn't eat hardly anything. 10 minutes before he was to leave his body, his arthritis went away. That's trippy. But then people know, oh, he's going to die now. Because he's finished his worldly karma. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, he wasn't eating hardly any food anyway, but the point being is his diet was not creating his arthritis. It was his destiny karma. See? So we want to be careful not to judge it, but clearly there are so many chronic diseases that are self-induced. Even the AMA, in 1961, it said 97% of all coronary disease would be eliminated if we were vegetarian. So they understood karma too. So if we kind of keep that in mind, there's a relationship, but we have to leave in the destiny factor. And then we look at, well, how well do people recover from that? And that's all a really important thing to understand. So what we eat affects our health affects our consciousness. If our brains aren't working, if we're dumbed down because we're inflamed from vaccines, we're eating junk food, we're demineralized. Remember, minerals are frequencies of consciousness, right? So we're getting 15 minerals out of the 80 that we need. Guess what? We're not going to have a very expanded consciousness. So what we eat affects our ability to have expanded consciousness, affects our ability to have options, affects our ability to an expanded awareness. So they're interrelated. And probably the most important thing is what we eat. We're going to end with a quote from Ramana Maharshi, who's a great enlightened saint, no longer alive. When asked, what's the most important support to spiritual life besides the non-dual awareness? Is it celibacy? Is it this? Is that? And you say, well, the householders are in the home thinking they should go out and be in the fields, right? And the swamis are thinking, you know what? I really need to be in a relationship. He said, but none of them are thinking about God. He says the only thing that counts is to eat pure food. When you eat pure food, the thoughts of the mind are quiet and the knots of the heart become untied. So the most important thing is to eat the pure food. In his day, that was a vegetarian/vegan diet. That was in his day. So there we are. He says that's the most important support to spiritual life. We need to see, you can't eat your way to God. We don't want to pretend that's true. But what we can say is what you eat affects your health. Your health affects the functioning of your being to be able to tune in. And what we eat also affects your consciousness and then our ability to perceive the higher dimensional planes of which exist all the time, but are we ready to really experience it? So we are what we eat. By eating live foods, we become a superconductor of the divine in our lives. And may everybody be blessed that they're inspired to do that. I hope.